So my prayer for all of you today who are watching this video or listening to it is that the Lord will open the eyes of your heart and the eyes of your understanding so that you'll be able to actually see and inculcate the truth, whatever truth there may be in what I'm presenting to you today. So we're going to look at the story that incorporates the first four trumpets of Revelation. But before we do that, we have to review something, because this is the part that you have to understand if you're going to basically understand Revelation. Revelation is a book that is a series of visions that were given to Jesus first, who gave them to an angel, who gave them to John, who wrote it down and presented it to 7 churches in Asia Minor, who were told, don't change anything, just keep it the way it is, and it has come all the way down to us. So we are given this book of visions that John had. In another video, I talked about how John is a time traveler, and this is hinted at in Revelation chapter 1, where we read that John was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. When we see that phrase, in the Spirit, we need to ask ourselves a question. Where do we see this in another place in the Bible? Most of the commentaries that I've read and many people who talk about John being in the Spirit don't really know exactly what to make of that. So I've done a couple of videos on the book of Ezekiel and its connection to the book of Revelation. And one of those connections is Ezekiel was in the Spirit. Ezekiel was in the Spirit, and he went here and he went there. And this idea of him being in the Spirit was connected with Ezekiel chapter 1, which has to do with time travel, that he is going to be moving through time and space, seeing, witnessing certain things, and there is no order according to chronology. And so you can't really understand the book of Ezekiel chronologically. You have to understand it according to the visions. The same thing is true with the book of Revelation. It's a series of visions that were given to John. He was in the Spirit, and while he was in the Spirit, he saw the Lord Jesus standing before him. He heard a voice behind him like a trumpet, and it was while he was in the Spirit in Revelation 17 that he saw a woman in the wilderness, and it was while he was in the Spirit, was taken to a high mountain, and he saw New Jerusalem coming down out of heaven. So these are out of order events. We shouldn't expect that the book of Revelation will be chronological. Yet, this is how most people interpret it. And there's a difference between a sequence of events, things that occur in a specific sequence, and chronology. Just because you know when something is going to happen in relation to something else doesn't mean that all of those things are going to happen in chronological order, that there aren't some other things that are going to be in between events. I'm going to leave a link to some of my time traveler videos so that you can look at those and, maybe understand for yourself where I'm coming from. The second thing I want to mention is that John was commanded to record everything that he saw, everything. He recorded what he heard, the sound when he was, the sound like a trumpet, the voice like a trumpet, when he was in the Spirit. He recorded the things that he saw when Christ was standing in front of him, and he was told to record the things that he was going to see afterward. Just because these visions occur in a certain order doesn't mean the order is chronological. And I know this is a hard concept for a lot of people, especially when we've heard over and over and over again that the letters to the 7 churches are church history. There is no internal evidence from the book of Revelation that that is the case, and there's no reason why we would interpret the letters to the 7 churches as church history. There is some kind of, I call it flimsy correlation between Western Christendom and the letters to the seven churches, sort of. But as you get into the actual letters to the seven churches, you eventually begin to realize that you can't use that method of historical churches to interpret the book. And one of the big red flags for me in that way of interpreting it, because that was the first way that had been presented to me, so I kind of hung on to it for a little while. And then after a while, I looked at the letter to the church of Smyrna, and I went, this is interesting because it's talking about 10 days of tribulation. And people do all kinds of, backflips and all kinds of weird contortions to make the 10 days of tribulation be 10 years of tribulation. Well, here's the problem. It ruins your hermeneutic. Okay, so if in other places in Revelation, in fact, almost every other place in Revelation where it's talking about a certain time frame, 5 months, 1,260 days, and so on, everybody takes that literally. But for some reason, they want to throw out the 10 days and make that symbolic. If you want to be consistent, you can't do that. You have to take all time measurements as being literal unless there is a very specific reason within the text itself that tells us we shouldn't do that. Okay, and having this flimsy connection with church history, and we're talking Western Christendom, it isn't even actually church history, it's a narrow interpretation of just Western church history. It doesn't include Eastern church history, the Orthodox Church, what was going on in Africa, what was going on in India, what was going on with Christianity in other parts of the world. It's Western seminary trained people who promote this. I think people in other parts of the world would find it kind of silly and foolish. Anyway, the next thing I want to bring up is that when John recorded this message and he gave it to the seven churches, they were told that they were to guard or keep the testimony. And I've done several videos on what is the testimony. The testimony, in short, is the book of Revelation. This is the testimony that they were to guard. It's the spirit of prophecy. The testimony of Jesus, what he gave to John, is the spirit of prophecy. And this testimony he entrusted to the seven churches who were told to guard or keep this testimony. It wasn't referring to the fact that they had to obey all the things that were in it. That isn't how that word is used for guarding or keeping. The way that word is used is that they were to protect or guard. They were entrusted with being part of the chain of custody of this information, and they weren't to change any of it. In fact, if they did, Revelation 22 tells us that their portion in the holy city would be taken away. It was that serious. The actual names of the cities that these letters were directed to, Ephesus, Smyrna, Thyatira, Pergamum, and so on, these churches were used symbolically. There's something in the meaning of the name, like Smyrna, for example, means myrrh, which was used as a part of incense, which is connected with an altar, which is connected with suffering and martyrdom and souls under the altar. Either the name was used symbolically, or there was something about that particular city that was notable, that, for instance, in the Church of Laodicea, they got water from a cold source and water from a warm source because they didn't have their own source of water. But by the time both the warm water and the cold water reached them, the hot water and the cold water reached them, it was undrinkable. It wasn't palatable. And that's what Jesus is saying, because you're neither hot nor cold, I'll spew you out of my mouth. So there is something about the city, either symbolically or the name of the city, that has to do with end time events. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with those actual churches that were in existence in the first century. But just like John, they were incorporated into the story. So like John, remember, he's told to eat a scroll and then to prophesy again that the scroll would be sweet in his mouth and bitter in his stomach. that he actually became an actor in the story. And the same thing is true with the seven churches. So the book of Revelation actually bills itself as end time prophecy. This is the book that God the Father gave to Jesus. This is the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him. Okay, it isn't the revelation of Jesus Christ of his person. It's the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him. God gave Jesus this book to give to us so that the end time people would know the things that were going to be happening to them quickly. We know that John was in the Spirit, which means he's a time traveler, that he is going to be going back and forth, but in time and space between heaven and earth, between one place to another place, basically from time, his own time, all the way through to the new heavens and the new earth. So this is a story of John's experience when he was in the Spirit. What this means then is that the story is not chronological. It's not. So please, if there's any way that you can get that out of your head, I wish you would. Because if you can do that, this whole book is going to open up to you. It's just going to open up and come alive for you. So the story of the trumpets is actually found in Revelation 8, but it's connected to the story that we find in Revelation 5. So in Revelation 4, we see the elders arriving in heaven. They're seated on thrones. They're kings. They have crowns that they cast before the Lord. They're priests. They hold golden incense in bowls. They're worshipers. They have golden harps. They're judges. That is, they sit on thrones. They're part of God's divine council. They arrive in heaven. They arrive in heaven on the 8th day, which is when they're caught up to God and to his throne. Revelation 12 tells us about this child who is going to rule all nations with a rod of iron. That is Christ, and it is us in association with Christ, according to what we read in Revelation. I think it's chapter 2 where it talks about that Jesus is going to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and we are going to do the same thing. Those of us who are kings and priests, that's something we're going to do. So Revelation 12 tells us about the birth of a child. We know a male child will have 7 days between the day that it's born and the day that it's presented to God. This gives us a week on earth in our immortal bodies. Okay, and that's during this period of time that you see right here. And just before we're changed, which is right here, there's going to be a war in Israel. Okay, this is travail, the travail of the woman. And in Scripture, travail is a war. So we're going to be changed. We'll be on earth for 7 days, and then on the 8th day, we're going to be raptured. That's when we appear in heaven. So already we can see that Revelation 12, the events of Revelation 12, some of them, not all of them, actually take place before the elders arrive in heaven. Elders are associated with God's throne room, the 144,000 of Israel who also are going to be raptured later in the story. They are associated with the temple and Mount Zion. Okay, so Revelation chapter 5, it's still the same day, the 8th day. That's when the elders begin to act as priests, just like Aaron began to act as priest after 7 days of he and his sons sitting in their priestly garments in the doorway of the tabernacle in full sight of everybody, of the children of Israel in the wilderness. Then on the 8th day, they immediately began their priestly work. Fire came down and they offered a sacrifice and so on. On the 8th day, the elders, who are also priests, will begin to intercede for the saints on earth. And then in Revelation chapter 6, we have a list. It's the 6 seal events. There's actually 7 seals, but the 7th seal isn't going to be till Revelation chapter 8. Revelation 6 is just a list. It's just a list. It's nothing more than that. There are certain events that take place within that list. We have to go other places in order to find out where these seal events are going to take place chronologically. Okay, so in Revelation 5, we know that this is when Christ gets the scroll and he begins to open the scroll And I believe on this same day, seals 1 through 4, the riders on the horses, they will be released on this same day. So right here, Christ takes the scroll and seals 1 through 4 are opened. There's other things that happen, but those are the ones that are part of the story. So another part of the story is that the Spirit of God is sent out into all the earth, okay? And that's before the seals are opened, okay? So right here, the Spirit is sent out. That is also on the 8th day. Revelation chapter 7 actually provides us a link between the first 4 seals and the first 4 trumpets of Revelation chapter 8. So we see in Revelation chapter 7 that there are 4 angels that are holding back the 4 winds. And of course, the 4 winds are a reference to those winds that stir up the sea in the book of Daniel chapter 7. And it's those 4 winds that stir up the sea that allow for this beast to come forward. And that's, of course, in this case, it's the 7th king. It's the rider on the white horse, the person who is going to become the Antichrist. And we have Christ, who is has the seal of the living God. He is rising from the east. This is also an allusion to the book of Ezekiel, where we see God coming from the east, and he's full of glory. He's coming to Jerusalem. What this angel with God's authority says, and this angel's Christ, of course, he's not an angel. You see those 4 angels that are holding back the 4 winds, and the angel, Christ, tells 4 other angels, don't harm anything. Don't harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we've sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. So when does the sealing of the servants of God, the 144,000, take place? It takes place before the child is caught up, before the elders arrive in heaven. That's when the 144,000 are sealed. All right? Revelation 12, this is when the child is caught up. But we're going to help Christ seal the 144,000 before we're caught up. It's during this 7 days right here. That's when we're going to help seal the 144,000. Okay, so Revelation 7 actually takes place before Revelation 4, and it takes place in the middle of some of the events of Revelation 12. So we have the Revelation 12 sign, which happened in 2017. The child will be born, okay, and then there's 7 days to seal the 144,000, and then the child is caught up, and then the elders arrive in heaven, and then they begin to intercede for the people that they just got done sealing in the Holy Spirit. The 4 angels that have power to harm the earth and the sea and the trees and so on are the trumpet angels. They're not the 4 angels who are holding back the 4 winds. They're the 4 trumpet angels. Chronologically, the events of Revelation 7, especially the first part of it, take place before the child is caught up to God and to his throne. Okay, so chapter 8 opens with the 7th seal. Okay, the 7th seal should be a part of the seal list. Okay, the trumpets do not come out of the 7th seal. Okay, this is, people teach this. It doesn't. The seals are their own list of events. The trumpets are their own list, and the bowls are their own list, and they're just a list of things that will happen. Chronologically speaking, we have to, use the clues to find out where they actually belong on a timeline. So we just leave the 7th seal, silence in heaven, and that, I believe, silence precedes judgment, and there's this holy hush before God begins to pour out his wrath on the earth. Silence in heaven for half an hour. And then in verse 2 of Revelation 8, then I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and 7 trumpets were given to them. And another angel came and stood at the altar with a golden censer. And he was given much incense to offer with the prayers of all the saints on the golden altar before the throne. And the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints rose before God from the hand of the angel. And then the angel took the censer and filled it with fire from the altar, threw it on the earth, and there were peals of thunder, rumblings, flashes of lightning, and an earthquake. So this passage here actually has a really strong connection to Revelation chapter 5, where we see the elders interceding, holding golden bowls of incense, and they're interceding for the saints. In chapter 8, we read about the angel taking that incense, adding more to it, and then taking fire and casting it to the earth. And when he does that, there's loud noises and rumbles and flashes of light and lightning and this great earthquake. So the storyline is actually continued from Revelation 5 into Revelation chapter 8. Okay, Revelation 8, especially the first 4 trumpets. The first 4 trumpets will also begin on the same day. Okay, the 8th day, the same day we arrive in heaven. It's all the same story. There is no serious amount of time between when the elders intercede for the saints and when the angel takes those bowls of incense and adds more to them and begins to offer them before God. When you see this as prayers being offered, and you see that they're offered to God, that the answer to the prayers is this fire and, being cast to the earth and the lightning and the voices and this earthquake, that this is an indication to people on earth that their prayers are answered. All right. Now, from here on out, these believers are going to be going through some of the same things that the earth dwellers, remember, there are the bad people whose names were never, ever, ever written in the Lamb's Book of Life from the foundation of the world. So there's going to be some things that believers who are on earth are going to be experiencing along with the earth dwellers. And it's sort of like the plagues of Egypt. The Israelites and the Egyptians both experienced some of the plagues, but eventually it came to a point where the Israelites had light in their dwellings. There things that happened to the Egyptians were not possible, did not happen to the Israelites. And the same thing is kind of going to hold true here, where the first 4 trumpets are going to affect believers and non-believers alike. The last 3 trumpets, the 3 woes, the 5th, 6th, and 7th trumpet, are woes to the earth dwellers. Woe to those who dwell on earth. Okay, and we're going to look at the woes of the 5th, 6th, and 7th trumpets when we get to Revelation chapter 9 and 11. Okay, so once the first 4 trumpets sound, both believers and non-believers are going to be affected by what's happening here. And remember, these aren't judgments. These are just events. These are things that happen. God is not judging people yet. Okay, there'll be judgment for the earth dwellers because they're part of Satan's core group. They will end up, taking on spirits and so on and so forth. But the rank and file person just living during that time, even if they're not a Christian, they are not judged yet. They're not judged until the great white throne judgment. All right, so that's just an aside. Verse 6, now the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets prepared to blow them. The first angel blew his trumpet, and there followed hail and fire mixed with blood, and these were thrown upon the earth. And 1/3 of the earth was burned up, and 1/3 of the trees were burned up, and all green grass was burned up. And the second angel blew his trumpet, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea, and 1/3 of the sea became blood. 1/3 of the living creatures in the sea died, and 1/3 of the ships were destroyed. The third angel blew his trumpet, and a great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch. And it fell on 1/3 of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood. 1/3 of the waters became wormwood, and many people died from the water, because it had been made bitter. And the 4th angel blew his trumpet, and 1/3 of the sun was struck, and 1/3 of the moon, and 1/3 of the stars, so that 1/3 of their light might be darkened, and 1/3 of the day might be kept from shining, likewise 1/3 of the night. So the first four trumpet angels are going to be affecting a third of whatever. And they have destructive powers over the earth and the sea and the trees and the grass and so on. The first trumpet event, which is blood and hail and fire that are thrown on the earth, and a third of the earth is burned up, and the trees are burned up, and all the green grass is burned up. This may actually take place over just a third of the earth's surface. And I think that's the most likely way to interpret that. And I think that the first trumpet may originate from outside of the earth, like be a comet or asteroid and debris fields and so on. Or it may be ejecta, ash and so on, coming from a volcano. Because remember, fire is cast to the earth and there's a great earthquake. And sometimes the earthquakes can cause volcanoes to happen. So it could either be a comet or an asteroid or something like that, or it could be stuff that comes out of a volcano and then falls to the earth. The second trumpet is something like a great mountain burning with fire. And this does seem like a volcano. Mountains burning with fire are volcanoes, all right? And if it's cast into the sea, it's very likely that an island, a volcanically formed island, may actually, part of the island may slide into the sea, in which case it would cause tidal waves and so on. And, of course, ships would be destroyed. Of course, animals in the sea would be killed. This is something that we kind of had hints at over the past few years with the volcano in the Canary Islands, and a kind of a unsteady portion of the island that could theoretically slide into the ocean, as well as in Hawaii with the volcanoes over there, and a portion of that of the island is unstable, and that could also fall into the sea. It caused tidal waves, disrupt shipping, as well as killing animals in the sea. The third trumpet describes a star falling from heaven that poisons the fresh water. And this may be a man-made star, like a missile, like a nuclear missile or something that lands and pollutes the fresh water. Or it could be an actual meteor or asteroid that has some properties that cause it to be toxic for humans. And then the fourth trumpet may be descriptive of the combined events of the first three trumpets, especially if you have volcanoes activated, because we know that all you need is one gigantic eruption from a volcano spewing ash into the air. It can actually change the weather, change the amount of sunlight and moonlight and starlight that comes to the earth from humans' perspective. So if we're talking about a third of the earth being a third of the actual landmass, if that's how we're to view this, and I'm not dogmatic about that, but if that were the case, the logical part of the earth that would take the brunt of those first three trumpet events would be the Western Hemisphere. The Eastern Hemisphere, that includes the Middle East and Europe and the Far East, China, and so on, they're all kind of players in the end times, and so they probably aren't going to be as affected by those trumpets, the trumpet events. But I think that the sun going dark by a third and the moon and the stars also being dark, that could affect actually the whole world, because once that stuff gets in the atmosphere, it kind of goes everywhere. If we're talking about volcanic ash, the whole earth would be affected. The earth's temperature would drop, crops would fail, and right away we'd be in a scenario of actual, doom. And the seal events where there's famine and war and all of those things start to make sense in light of various trumpet events taking place. So the title of this video is No More Delay, the first four trumpets. So what delay are we talking about here? Well, when Christ, the angel who comes from the east, told those 4 trumpet angels, don't do anything until we've sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads, that began the delay. Okay, that began the delay. And the delay is really brief. It's only a matter of a few days, like 8 days total. 7 days that the male child is on the earth and helping Christ to seal the 144,000, as well as ministering in any other capacity that we're called to during those 7 days. And then when we get to Revelation chapter 10, that delay is actually mentioned as being a delay, and it's mentioned in the context of trumpets. Okay, so Revelation 10, verse 5. And the angel whom I saw standing on the sea and on the land raised his right hand to heaven and swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created heaven and what's in it, the earth and what's in it, and the sea and what's in it, that there would be no more delay, but that in the days of the trumpet call to be sounded by the 7th angel, the mystery of God would be fulfilled, just as he announced to his servants, the prophets. Okay, and all of this is, of course, an allusion to Daniel chapter 12, when that man, who is actually a pre-incarnate Christ, there raises his right hand and his left hand and swears by him who lives forever and ever that these things would happen the way he said. And then, of course, the passage in the Old Testament that talks about God doesn't do anything unless he announces them ahead of time to his servants, the prophets. And the mystery of God in this case is the book of Revelation. This is what's being revealed here, that it's not a mystery anymore. It's actual revelation that God has revealed. So when the 7th angel sounds his trumpet, that everything pertaining to the time of the end will be over. So the 7th trumpet is actually at the very end. This is when the dead are raised that haven't already been raised, dead believers that haven't already been raised, including martyrs. And remember, only believers are resurrected at the end. Anybody else who is not a believer, even if they love Jesus, they're not going to be resurrected until the great white throne judgment. This is the resurrection for believers. It's the premier resurrection. It's the first resurrection. It's the best resurrection. It's not necessarily the first resurrection to take place, because there are going to be dead people raised here back when we're changed. The dead will be given their immortal bodies the same day that we're given ours, okay, in the twinkling of an eye at the same time. But the first resurrection is talking about the best resurrection, the premier resurrection, that only believers will be raised at the end. So the 7th trumpet has to do with the rewarding God's servants, the prophets. It's also when thrones are set up. Okay, and I believe those are our thrones. The 24 elders will have thrones on the earth. The apostles will be judging the 12 tribes of Israel and will be judging the angels, those fallen angels. That to me will be very, very exciting. Paul tells us, do you not know that you will judge angels? So the fallen angels who ran amok during the last days will get our opportunity to judge them. And the dead believers will be raised. Now remember, anybody who is saved over what we call the tribulation is a part of the church, okay? Because they are believers. They believe in God. They believe in Christ by faith, which is what makes them believers. Anybody who obeys and loves Christ after his second coming, they're not technically believers. They may love Jesus, but you have to believe in him by faith. And if you see him, if every eye sees him, there's no faith involved in that. And there is a reward for faith. You know, Jesus said, blessed are those who believe even though they haven't seen. Okay, there is a reward for faith. And so everybody who believes in Christ by faith, including all the so-called tribulation saints, is a part of the church, is a part of the bride, will be a part of the New Jerusalem. Anybody who loves Jesus after that, they don't come to faith in Christ. They don't have faith because they see him. They're required simply to obey him and to serve and love him. And those people at the end of the millennium, they will go and be a part of the people living on the new earth. They're not going to be believers who are living in the New Jerusalem, although they'll be given access to the New Jerusalem to eat from the tree of life and drink from the water of life. Okay, so because John is a time traveler, and because he's given a series of visions that he recorded what he saw in each vision as he was given it. So he was given the visions in a certain order. He wasn't to change the order that he was given, but because he was in the Spirit, we know that there isn't necessarily anything chronological about the visions that he saw. Okay, so there's some chronology there, but more than chronology, it's about sequence. There's order of events. Events take place in a certain sequence. Seals 1 through 4 will take place before seals 5, 6, and 7. So if you have a sequence, things are going to happen in a sequence. But the way we see things happening in the visions isn't how it's going to play out on a timeline. Okay, so Revelation 10 talks about a delay, that there is no more delay. Revelation 7 tells us that the delay is because the trumpet angels are told don't do anything yet until we've sealed the servants of our God. And then in Revelation 10, again, we learned that it's when the seventh trumpet sounds that everything in the book of Revelation is going to be over. And the context of Revelation 10 is actually when believers are changed. 1 foot on the land of the living. 1 foot on the sea is the place of the dead. And then roaring like a lion. And in a passage that also talks about God doesn't do anything without telling his servants, the prophets, we also read that a lion doesn't roar unless he has taken prey. What is the prey that Christ, as the lion roaring, has taken? Well, it's believers. It's you and me. We belong to him. He has taken us as his prey. So you can see, hopefully, how different parts of the different visions dovetail one another. So in a list of events, Revelation 10 actually takes place before 7. 1 foot on the land, 1 foot on the sea, raise the dead, change the living. And then we're called to seal the 144,000 of Israel. Then we're caught up to God and to his throne after 7 days, because we're a male child. On the 8th day, we're brought into God's presence. Revelation 4 tells how we arrive in heaven and all of the things that we get, our thrones, our crowns, our white robes, and so on. Revelation 5 tells us that we immediately begin our role as priests, interceding for the people on earth. Christ sends out the Spirit to those who are on the earth. He takes the scroll, and then seals 1 through 4 are opened. And then we go back to Revelation chapter 8. And this is where the trumpets 1 through 4. This all happens on the same day. So all this is in a timeline form. That there's a link to it in the description box. And I also want to make available to you another just one-page sheet. And this should be very encouraging to you. This is talking about how 2023 is actually a very good year for the rapture, because once we get to 2024, we've gone outside of the 80 years of the fig tree generation. And I think you would be very blessed by reading what our brother Daniel in Alaska has written for us. So I'm going to include that as a link in the description below. I hope you'll take a look at that and study it. It's very good, and it's really, really encouraging. All right, so if you're interested in getting a thumb drive that has, a lot of information, a lot of my videos, book, show notes, all kinds of stuff, you can still purchase a thumb drive for $5 if you live in the U.S., and I'll leave a link to Ken's information. You can order it from him, Ken, in Tennessee. I think that's all the business I have. Till the next video, I pray you'll have a very, very blessed day.